Hi everyone, welcome back to the second episode of Demand Decoded. This is a regular live event series that discusses the core components of demand generation success. And if you don't know already, we're Blend. We're a B2B website and demand generation agency. Thanks so much for being here today. We really do appreciate you taking the time to join us. So today I've got Phil, co-founder at Blend, and Amanda, commercial director at Blend, with me.
Hello.
And we'll be discussing how you can demonstrate the value of marketing to your senior execs. As we do go along, feel free to ask questions. Just drop them in the comments on LinkedIn, and we'll pick them up as we go along. Last time in the first episode, we were absolutely inundated with amazing questions that made for, really interesting conversations, insights, discussions. So please, don't be shy. Pop them in the comments and we'll pick them up as we go. So I think a really good place to start for this topic would be to actually go down to the root cause of this issue and truly understand why demonstrating the value of marketing is such an issue. So Amanda, I don't know if you want to kick things off and discuss that issue.
Yeah, I think for many marketers, they are having to bridge a gap in understanding between themselves and the C-suite. Marketing as a discipline, it has a lot of its own language, jargon, certainly, which I think we can all be guilty of. And its metrics can seem when they're not necessarily the right metrics, seem very abstract to the C-suite from their goal, which is the growth of the business. And why is that? I suppose it's largely because those organizations, that C-suite is often made up of people who founded the business, and they may well have done so not really needing marketing, either by building their idea, their concept, using the power of their existing networks, people they'd worked with at previous companies, or it can be because they've come from very different backgrounds into an existing company, but ultimately the truth is that most C-suites are not made up of people who have done marketing at the coalface. They'll come from sales perspective, or they will have come from a technical background, let's say, be the people who made the product or put the service that the company offers to the world together in the first place. Marketing probably doesn't come naturally to them. What they are focused on primarily is going to be the growth of the business. And it can, I think, in those kind of environments, seem like marketing is a small piece of the puzzle, if a piece of the puzzle at all. Maybe it's a nice to have, not a need to have in their minds. So you really do have to bridge that gap in understanding. I think that is ultimately why it is so hard for marketers to make ground and feel like they have a seat at the table when it comes to the board, definitely. And certainly when it comes to kind of the initiatives that marketing need to do, when they want to do things like rebrand, build a new website, go to market with a new product, they are often having to make a case for investment that could be perceived as cost, which is a really hard thing to do. You've got to, and to do that well, ultimately you need to have empathy. What does the board want to understand? They ultimately want to understand how what you are suggesting isn't going to make them look better, sound better. How is it going to turn into results, the same results that they look at? So, how does it tie into the business's objectives? How marketers kind of develop that, that's probably another question, but it really does. The real challenge for them is making sure that they are well understood in that space, and the best way to do that is to understand what matters to the C-suite.
Yeah, I think sometimes, even when there are goals, they are just the wrong goals in a business sense. They are so siloed to marketing that they're often kind of dusted under the carpet as less important to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. The word vanity metric gets bandied about, and there's certainly used to be the case. I think it's less and less so, but that sense of the marketing department as a cost center and not a value generator, as the colouring in department, like that kind of negative language certainly exists, I would say, in older school businesses. And it's something to overcome. And you don't do that by talking about social engagement. You do that by talking about impact on pipeline. You do that by talking about the things that matter most to your company. And that's often going to come to you through your relationship between sales and marketing. Ultimately, a situation in which marketing and sales are working to the same objectives, but one doesn't control the other, is the right sort of balance that most marketers want to be striking. You want to be aligned, you want to be working together, but you don't necessarily want one to be dictating the activities of the other. You want to be supporting each other. But it can be quite hard to influence that balance at the C-suite, because again, as I say, those people will often come from a sales background, or they will have moved into sales as part of creating the business in the first place.
Yeah. I think as well, marketing can be misunderstood as, the time of impact that it takes for something to actually work. It's all to do with expectations, and often the expectation of marketing is not realistic. That's why we get into the lead generation, demand generation debate and start looking for immediate success rather than appreciate that marketing is a long-term play if you want to do it right.
Yes, and certainly in situations where that balance isn't necessarily right between sales and marketing, sales is short-term needs. What are we going to close this quarter? What are we going to close this month? Can end up influencing marketing to act in a way that actually impacts their ability to deliver on those long-term improvements. Things like, if you're in a world where search is important, improving your search engine optimization, that's not something that has overnight results for you. It's a long-term investment, a continual investment as well. And that can be really hard to keep the momentum going on when you are potentially being drawn into, we need to have this event, we need to do, this campaign, and we need to do it now, because we've got to meet sales' targets. You've got to, marketers are in a tough spot in many ways. They're between a lot of different things. They're between best practice and what the customer wants, and they're between the immediate needs of the business and of sales. They've really got to use all the tools at their disposal when it comes to communication to make sure they keep that right balance and don't get drawn into too many tactical, week to week, hand to mouth activities, and really do make sure that they keep their eye on the prize, which is that long-term growth that only comes with continued investment in the right areas that generate demand for the kind of product and service that you deliver.
On that point, actually, I think it's important to remember that there's a plethora of marketing metrics that marketers should measure and analyze and keep close to them, because they inform their day-to-day execution and they guide their implementation. But if they can unite around revenue with sales, not only are they talking the language of the board and they've got a better conversation with that group, in many ways it's a better measure of marketing impact anyway, as per the lead gen, demand gen discussion. And I think that comes clear when you really closely analyze your marketing generated success, as it were, to isolate and separate correlation from causation in terms of what's creating opportunities in the pipeline and customers at the end of the day. Because it's far too easy in sort of traditional marketing thinking to lump together good and bad data and treat it as a success or a failure of a channel or a tactic. So things like split pipeline analysis and looking really closely at what goes on to turn into an opportunity and into a customer can really reveal the impact that marketing is having. And it usually is a pipeline impact, a revenue impact, at the end of that process, that customer journey. So there's a lot to discover when you look closely at what's going on there.
I think that's so true, especially that point that you make about when you are looking at the same metrics as the board themselves and the things that impact and influence those metrics, you also as the marketer are doing a better job. So not only are you communicating better, you're getting more buy-in, but you're more likely to be getting the ultimate results that the business needs.
Right.
So it really is a win all round. But it can be very difficult, I think, with all the kinds of metrics that are available, all the tools that you might have at your disposal to see that ultimate bottom line impact. And yeah, it's not necessarily about identifying vanity metrics. It's actually like finding the points of sanity, which are, okay, we can see across all these different things that we're doing contributions to this one end goal. It's still true, I think, for a lot of marketers that there will be lots of isolated activities and campaigns that do not draw from the same overarching strategy. And when that is the case, not only is it harder to measure the impact, but you're not necessarily even getting the best return on investment in those activities because they are working in isolation. You've got ads over here, you've got content over there. You're not thinking about the holistic overview of what you're delivering in your marketing plan, and that's not necessarily coming from a big strategic angle.
Yeah, I think we need a petition to get sanity metrics added to the dictionary, because I absolutely love that. It's vanity versus sanity, love it. I suppose just on that as well, when it comes to measuring revenue and pipeline, I think it's important to say it's not always that easy. Like it's easy to say, oh, just measure revenue, just measure pipeline, but actually it can be harder than that. If your marketing is totally disconnected from your pipeline, from your revenue, from maybe your CRM, you actually don't have visibility of how your marketing is influencing that pipeline, that revenue. So I don't know, what kind of things can marketers do if they don't have access to that data to bring them closer aligned with the rest of the business functions?
I mean, I would say that at the end of the day, if you don't have a great integrated platform, if you don't have strong integration between your CRM and your marketing, there are going to be points of agreement that you can have with your sales team on what leads are high quality, what leads show intent. You can introduce, MQL, SAL as classification, and they are going to come to you through different means. Some of them are going to come to you through phone lines. That's fine if you're in a space where that still happens. If they're coming to you through your website, obviously they're automatically, you're going to know who they are because they're going to be filling in forms and you're going to be getting that data. If you can reach agreement with sales, you can always get to some point that bridges the gap of, okay, this lead is showing these characteristics, therefore that's a marketing qualified lead. Sales have come back and said, yes, this is a good lead, and we're talking to them. That's then a sales qualified lead. And there are different terms out there, of course, but those are probably two of the most well known. And if in doubt, if nothing else exists, a spreadsheet exists for that, right? If we're talking about a space where you really don't have that view, you are, I would hope, dealing with small volumes of data, frankly, and a good spreadsheet can show you this one moved through from marketing to sales fed back that it was good, and then we can get some stats off the back of that. But I would certainly say that when that's becoming more than a dozen a month, you should be thinking about how you can take that onto a platform that means that there's no room for human error, because that stuff is very, very important.
Two things to add to that. I think anything in this area starts with or needs to be based on good budget control. You need to know what you're investing in order to be able to report back on it. So cost of your leads, cost of your marketing efforts, and ideally cost of customer are important things to track and know if you can. The other thing is that I see a lot of modern marketing projects, whether they're transformation a function or a strategy or a technology, they start with the intention of connecting marketing with the CRM, with sales, so that they can get that feedback loop going and get that data back. But for a variety of reasons, not only are those parts of the project often sort of underestimated in terms of how much challenge they present, but they're often the bit that doesn't quite get done because the data's too dirty, the integration's too complex or costly, or there just isn't the will to get over that final hurdle. But it's perhaps the most important hurdle in that project landscape, because without that connection, you can't create that automated measurement of the impact in that important revenue context. And so, it sort of pains me when I see that part of the project sort of get deprioritized or forgotten about, when it really holds the key to a lot of value for the organization. So if you start a project with the intention of connecting your marketing function to your CRM, then it's worth trying to find a way to persevere and see that done, because it's so valuable to you.
Well, and that specific point, that's a great example of a specific activity that the time or the investment could be seen as pure cost because it doesn't add value, right? That's where exactly. I mean, but the truth, nothing could really be further from the truth, because when you look across all of marketing's activities, there's lost value in not having that data seamless, in terms of time that's being spent in data management. There's risk presented by that, poor data management. No one really wants that. No one wants the negative consequences of that. So that's an important consideration too. And really, when it comes to presenting costs to the people who sign off on it, things like people like the CFO, all cost from marketing needs to be put in the overall context of marketing's overall cost. That's good budget management, is understanding every cost that marketing presents and making sure that when you are measuring success, you're really clear on where all of that cost comes from, because it's all contributing. It's not that just not integrating is, oh, well, that's $5,000 saved and maybe a couple of hours of marketing Mike's time. It's actually a fundamental piece of the overall puzzle, the overall investment. It's not an opportunity to save cost. It's not a cost. It might not present itself specifically as being a thing that influences more people to buy, but it allows for the seamless delivery of marketing and the better feedback. And it reduces risk as well, which is always preferable.
Yeah. And I think whilst we're on the topic of ROI, obviously it's important to talk about attribution, I think, because ultimately when you're trying to measure the success of something, it's important to measure the result and impact off the back of that. So what are some of the ways, the simple yet effective attribution models that can be implemented to show that true ROI?
Who are you hoping is going to take that one down?
I know you love attribution.
Well, this is a hotly debated topic right now, and there's a variety of answers, and I'm not saying that any one answer is correct, which is why it's so important to look closely at your own data and try to identify or separate correlation from causation, good data from bad data. There's a variety of attribution models that you can use in software to tell you ultimately, which channels and which campaigns got somebody to your door. And lots of marketers are going to rely on that, these days. It's not necessarily the most accurate in terms of telling you where the knowledge of you or interest in you originated in the first place, the self-reported attribution discussion being so powerful. But the important thing is that until you look closely at where your pipeline and revenue is coming from, you can't make good investment decisions, with your budget. And knowing what the true source, for example, by self-reported attribution, of your revenue is, might see you make large redirections of funds from one channel to another, could see you save money. We talked about the integration itself not being a cost, not a saving, but it could lead to savings if you identify that certain initiatives are not, delivering for you, you can spend that money better elsewhere or less of it. So I don't want to say there's one and only one way of attribution, but it's important to do it and to be conscious of what you're looking at when you look at a piece of attribution data, what it's actually telling you about the buyer's journey.
I think I'd probably add to that first touch attribution is so often almost held up as the only standard, but especially in any situation where you might be thinking about longer sales cycles or anything where you might consider an account-based approach to your marketing of any kind. Thinking about factors that influence and contribute to the overall success of the someone becoming your customer is vital too. Salespeople, I've certainly worked with customers who have said their sales people will say, why would we spend money on the website? And you think, well, actually, how many sales cycles actually close without someone looking at that? And if it looks terrible, what does that say? Even if you've got the best salesperson in the world, does that not, qualify you out? So I think there's value in thinking about attribution models and data, but there's definitely also, alongside that data and metrics point, other conversations to have around brand and perception and ways to make sure that can also be understood in those, alongside those harder-nosed, more metrics-focused conversations too.
Yeah, absolutely. But buyers are spending less and less time talking to sales as part of the buying journey, as part of the buying process.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, software attribution will only tell you about that part of the journey where they are in contact with you and your sales team. So it's really important to have a broad and open mind about the influences that are going along the buyer's journey. And brand is becoming an increasingly important one as we see the landscape of search and social being disrupted quite quickly, particularly by AI at the moment. So this is an important place to have an open mind.
Yeah, the way that people are consuming and learning and educating has just completely evolved, hasn't it? So it's important that your attribution also evolves to take that into account.
And that is probably where marketers have opportunity, if not readily available to them right now, certainly should be thinking about, data. Most of the data we have in marketing is very quantitative. How many people on this page, how many engagements, but actually that qualitative feedback piece, spend more time with your personas, actually talk to them about what they look for and use that to come back to the board and say, I've been talking to customers and they say this, or I've been talking to prospects and they're saying this. So should we not be responding to their needs? That's another great way to build empathy with your C-suite, actually, is to say, I'm not just looking at data, which is the ultimate result. I'm looking at factors that influence that are more on the qualitative side. And I'm doing that by talking to the people who are ultimately going to make these decisions.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we've had a question. I'm not sure who it's from because it's not displaying, but this is a really, really great question. And actually a conversation Phil and I were having last week, the week before maybe, about multi-touch attribution. So I don't know if you want to take this one, Phil. Do you feel multi-touch attribution is something that not enough businesses are looking at to arm their marketing teams with? Great question.
Yeah. I have a problem with software attribution, full stop, because any model that you apply, be it first touch, last touch, W, relative, it's all assumption based to a large degree that the touch to which you assign the attribution influenced the purchase. And it's very hard to know that without talking to somebody about what influenced their purchase. So, do I think that not enough businesses are looking to arm their marketing teams with multi-touch attribution? I don't think that particularly. I think that not enough businesses are arming their marketing teams with self-reported attribution, because the insights you can gain from buyers telling you in their own words what triggered their interest in, their demand for what you offer. We've seen and we've been shown that it often trumps the insights that come from software-based attribution, which tell you which channel, for the most part, is most effective at welcoming that person in long after the problem awareness developed, long after the research process started, long after you first created brand affinity potentially with them. So it's like lead scoring. I think it's one of those things that's a little bit flawed at a fundamental level. And it's a thing where, like lead scoring, I see AI being pitched as a solution quite a lot. You know, we humans can't lead score accurately enough, so let's use AI. We humans can't do attribution accurately enough, so let's use AI. Problem is, any AI applied to these problems is going to use the same signals, and the signals might be the problem. They might tell you the wrong thing.
I think I'd add to that I think what a lot of businesses are not investing enough in is market research. Actually, it's that they're not, and that doesn't need to be big budget. Go to a market research firm and do a survey of 30,000, etc. That can be as simple as we're going to invest the time internally in interviewing 30 of our own customers about things that are not related to our service. Actually, it is in talking to humans, not in AI and data. It is on the qualitative, the softer side of things, but there's such great insight in doing user testing, in doing interviews about how you found us, how what our brand represents to you. There's lots to be learned from resources and with the same skill sets that are already at your disposal. And I don't think enough companies have the confidence to do that.
Yeah. I think so often multi-touch attribution is seen as the holy grail of attribution in marketing. But, like Phil said, there are some fundamental flaws with it. Like with any software attribution, it can only track so many touch points in your business that are enabled by cookies. And where those cookies aren't present, you can't track that. And there are so many touch points that are dark to that, invisible to that any type of software attribution, including multi-touch, can't track.
Yeah.
Okay, so aside from data now, because I think data is only so powerful with the story around it. So in supporting attribution metrics, what are some of the ways that marketing leaders can create a compelling narrative that actually highlights the role of marketing in driving that business growth?
I think a lot of how you create the best communication, because narrative is about communication. How do you create the best communication for your C-suite about the role that marketing has? It really is about understanding them as much as you possibly can. You're going into any conversation with them knowing how little time they actually have available for you. You're using the data to illustrate the point that you're trying to get across. You're not just showing reams and reams of it. You're pointing out the insight that is the most salient point, and you're making sure that it's very tangible to the person that you're sharing it with. As I kind of mentioned at the beginning, it can be really easy in the marketing world. We are surrounded by buzzwords, by jargon all the time, and it's really easy to think that everyone will understand that. Actually taking the time to translate yourself into something that's understandable by different people based on what they're doing, that's going to bridge a huge amount of the gap in between your understanding and theirs. I think it's also really important to set expectations around what you're communicating. So when you're talking about the data that you're seeing, the results that you're seeing, make sure that you set expectations around what the benchmark for this might be. So this is really good because the benchmark's at this level and we're 5% above that, or actually we've got a way to go because what we're looking to achieve is this. So it really is about contextualizing the points that you're making, not just reeling off all of the information at your disposal, making sure you're bringing what's most relevant to the table. And then I think, as we kind of touched on already, showing that it relates back to the business goals on the one hand, but also that what you're doing addresses the needs of the potential customers and buyers who are in the market. Talking about pain points and the things that those people who might make those decisions are actually facing in their roles, or in their lives. If you're in the consumer space, how are you solving people's problems? You're creating a narrative that shows that you're genuinely in touch with what the business is trying to achieve on the one hand, what the purchaser is trying to achieve on the other. You're the one helping one influence the other, and you're doing that in a way that is respectful of the time that's available to you with a person who's probably got 100 other places to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. So I think obviously we're over time again. Of course, that's just a common theme of these things now. I think I'll have to extend the time for the next one. But anyway, I think a really important point to touch on to kind of bring us to a close is, there's times of change at the moment, and marketing is often under scrutiny during those times of change. So what are some of the ways that you can, and marketing leaders can build a strong business case for future investments and actually defend budget that you already have from the arch nemesis here, which is of course the CFO?
I think that point about the CFO and understanding what's important to them still holds true. Proving that you are getting the best return out of the investment that you're making is always going to put you in a place where you're speaking very much the language that the CFO will understand. But also, if you think about what Phil was saying earlier, if you're tracking the right metrics, you will be a better marketer. And if you're a really good marketer, you should know when there are risks posed before anyone else, because you should be looking at how many people are buying. And if you see that that's not going the way that was expected, you will know first that something is not working. So you should be in the best possible position ultimately to know when your strategy needs to adapt and when you need to flex and move and change tactics and be proactive to make a difference. You're not you're not the team that comes in and finds that the desks have already been emptied. That should not be the case. You should know, looks like there are some tricky times ahead. Let's put our heads together and think about how we can cut some of the things that we are not seeing great results from, invest more of our budget over here and improve results now and make the difference that helps the business weather any storm that it's going through or any change that it's going through.
Yeah, even within activities that will produce a desirable outcome, there's usually ones that are longer plays versus shorter plays, may not produce the absolute ideal end result for the business, but an acceptable end result. So you can prioritize those over the short term and then get back to the longer plays, for example. So you could ultimately be in control of the situation rather than it being a situation that happens to you, by being alert and aware to what's going on in the market and proactively addressing it within the marketing strategy and the marketing budget, so that you're part of that conversation as well.
Yeah, proactivity is key. Cool. All right, let's wrap it up there then. So hopefully you all enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. If you did find it useful, we'd love to hear your feedback. Obviously, we want to keep evolving these, making them better, talking about interesting topics and that kind of thing. So be sure to follow the Blend LinkedIn page for the future events. And we're also uploading past events onto YouTube, onto the Blend YouTube channel. So if you just search for like Demand Decoded Blend, you'll get the first episode. It's also on LinkedIn, so you can check them out there. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Phil. That was great as always. Until next time.
Thanks, Dan. See you next time.
Thank you.